So my name is Søren. I'm the founder of Ucommerce, which is an e-commerce platform for Umbraco. I'm not talking about that today, but I am talking about some of the work we've done. So one of the things that makes us a little different than the typical company that works with Umbraco is that we don't do any solutions for end customers. We just do the platform, right? So we just do the e-commerce platform for Umbraco. So we're more like Umbraco, really, in that we're creating a software product that everybody else is using, basically. And what's awesome about that is we get to play with areas of Umbraco that's not that commonly used, right? We get to do awesome integrations with the Umbraco backend, so we can create a seamless experience between the CMS and the commerce platform. We get to use Umbraco Cloud and work with not just deploying sites on Umbraco Cloud, but also working with the innards of it, the guts, so we can make it do wonderful things, right? So what we're talking about here today is, it was originally called, the talk here was originally called Your Data and Packages on Umbraco Cloud. But I've had the opportunity to go around and present this at, I think, every Umbraco festival so far. So I've been in the US, I've been in Sweden, I've been in the Netherlands, here in Denmark. And one of the things I consistently found in all of those countries was the fact that not a lot of people were using Umbraco Cloud. So I'd actually like to start by asking you guys, how many of you know about Umbraco Cloud, that it exists at all? Almost everybody. That's good. That's what, 95%. Perfect. How many of you actually have played around with Umbraco Cloud? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 10%-ish. A little more. Good. How many of you have actual production sites on Umbraco Cloud? Is that a half a site that you deployed, or?
Like the festival site.
Oh, okay, well, so you do actually have you're playing with the workflow and all that. And these numbers are actually exactly the same in the US, in Sweden, in Netherlands, and Denmark. Umbraco Cloud is new-ish, right? We've been talking about it forever, but it's only just getting started. So what this talk turned into was also a way to give you a sense of what it actually is and how it works under the covers. So not what you see in the demos is, I have a website over here, I'm now deploying the website over there, and it all works and we're all happy, but how does it actually do it, right? And that's what this is about. And how can you actually hook into that? Does that make sense? Cool. If you have any questions, stick up your hand. I shall try not to ridicule you or call you out in any inappropriate ways, but if you have questions, just stop me and let me know, right? If we can turn it into a discussion, always much more fun for me. So, first thing is, this is Umbraco Cloud. That's Umbraco Cloud. So this is sort of the architectural outline of what it actually is. And the key with Umbraco Cloud is that you are, instead of dealing with one environment like you're used to, you're dealing with multiple environments. You can have just the one, but Umbraco Cloud really shines when you have multiple. So it all starts, let's see if this works. In the US, I was presenting on a TV screen, so when I authoritatively pointed at the screen, you couldn't actually see the laser, which makes it a little difficult. But here, I can do it, so that's awesome. So you start with a project. This is your Umbraco solution, right? You need to deploy that project somewhere, and the key here is that you have, in Umbraco Cloud, a development environment. So basically, a place where you stick your development environment, that's it. And then you have a secondary, or primary, if you will, but we are developers here, right? So the live environment is, of course, secondary. The development environment is primary, right? So we have a secondary environment, or live, depending on how you look at it, over here. Can you see for me? I'm trying to lose some weight, but I know I take up a little bit of space here, so I'll just move over here. So we have a live environment over here that we move things into, right? So we have multiple environments going. And we have a local environment as well to do actual development on. Now, this thing here is different from what you're used to in that if you think about what a typical Umbraco setup is, it's basically a file system with your code on it, and it's a database, right? It's SQL CE, SQL Express, or God help you, MySQL, right? Umbraco Cloud adds another thing on top of that, which is the Git repository right here, right? So how many of you are familiar with Git? everybody. Good. So to me, and I'm not sure, this is just me sort of, trying to figure out what they were thinking when they were building it, but to me, the insight they had with Umbraco Cloud is if we put a website onto Git, a complete website onto Git, we actually gain the ability to push that website around to other environments, right? That's the key. So once our website is inside Git, we can clone it and push it to a different environment, right? Like a development environment or a live environment or a staging environment. That you're all doing this today, but the difference here is this is actually working not with code, but actual compiled DLLs. So the completed website. Does that make sense? Yeah? Good. Now, the challenge here is that it all works. You're already doing this with your own continuous deployment environments and the way that you've set up your development process, right? Right? But the thing is here, we're missing some bits and bobs to make this work, because it's great that we can move DLLs and things like that around, but there's another piece here that's pretty important, right? And that's the content. And I would guess that if I ask about where the pain is in the deployment today, it's probably when you need to move content between environments. How many would agree with that statement? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Half of you. Yeah. It is difficult. It's not impossible, but it is difficult. You can always do the old create it over here, make a list of what you created over here, and create it over there. That's dumb, right? And that's what Umbraco Cloud actually tries to help with. So the key pieces of information that we need to deal with, there are two, right? There's content and there's structure. This is the way that Umbraco thinks about data. So structure data and content data. And content data is exactly what it sounds like. These are the nodes that your editors are creating inside of Umbraco and moving to build the actual website. Yeah? And the structure, this is what you guys are creating in Umbraco to support the content. Document types. Document types and things of that nature, right? Two different classes of data. Does that make sense? Good. We need to move those two bits and bobs from one environment to the other using Git. And of course, the premise of Git is everything is a file. Yes? So we need to turn this stuff into files. That's basically what Umbraco Cloud does. So we're trying to remove some of the magic here. It's just taking data in the CMS, turning it into a file in Git, pushing that file over, and bringing it back into the destination environment. That's it. I wouldn't say it's all Umbraco Cloud. So we need a way to take data from Umbraco, turn it into a file, and stick it onto a different environment, and then turn it into data again, yes? And the challenge there is that Umbraco has lots of different types of data, right? There's document types, there's content nodes, there is media, there's users, there's all sorts of things, right? I think I need you up there permanently, Chris. Can you do that? So in order to do that, we need to unify the way we think about data in Umbraco Cloud. And the way we do that is by turning everything into an item. You can just think of that as a general way of thinking about data. So nodes turn into items, document types turn into items, everything can basically turn into an item. It's a universal data model. Does that make sense? Good. So how do we do that? Well, there's a clever little thing in there that's called an item provider. And whenever you have a thing that you need to turn into a file, you will have an item provider to deal with it. This is what you would call a mapper or a serializer or something like that. There's no rocket science here. It's just a thing. You can take some data and turn it into a file. That's it. Then we have a data item or an item that we can stick onto the file system, and we can then push it over via Git onto the destination system. Use a different item provider to suck that information into the system, turn it into data again, right? Super simple stuff. It's when you get into the details of actually making it happen, it becomes a little difficult. So how do we work with that? As the guys mentioned just before this, it's Courier that underpins that to become Umbraco Deploy. So it's a tool that you may have worked with. This Courier here is heavily updated compared to what you probably tried to work with. And there will be a new version, but the principles will probably remain the same. I don't actually know, so we'll see. There's another thing here. If you think about content data, if you think about a page, that page will have some text on it, some HTML, some images, things like that. But also, it might have connections to other sets of data, right? So as long as you're just entering the text and adding tags and things like that, you're fine. But if you add an image, Or if you add a link using that fancy new tree picker to the page, now you actually have two pieces of data. And I think it's reasonable for a content editor to expect that information to also be moved to the target, right? So if I take this page and publish it to another environment, it would be great if the images also went along, right? It would also be great if all the other nodes that I linked in also move over, so we don't get broken links and things like that. And that's where item resolvers come in. There we go. So they basically take a look at the data that we're currently sticking onto the file system and figure out, are there actually any links here to other stuff that I need to include in this. I almost want to call it a publishing process, but it's not like the classic publish process in Umbraco, but it actually looks like a lot like what the bigger CMSs are doing when they need to move data between environments. They publish not just to a cache, but actually to a whole other environment for content delivery. You can think of it in those terms if you're familiar with some of those. Does all that make sense? Do you have any questions? Good. Now, what do we need to make it happen? First of all, I'm from Denmark. And there's a thing you probably don't know about Denmark, but we do have quotas there. And one of the quotas is when we do slideshows, we have to include Legos. Yes, it's true. So it's the only reason there are Legos here. I just needed to satisfy my quota for this year, and I'm done. So thank you very much for making that happen. But we'll just take a look at all the things that needs to happen. So when we're doing these extensions and making this data flow, Umbraco has, of course, already done it for you when it comes to content and document types. But you may have your own data that you want to have flow along with the content flow in Umbraco. And that's what we're looking at, right? So say you're doing a block system, right? Comments probably don't go into nodes because we all know lots of nodes in Umbraco is bad, at least for now. So that tends to go into a separate table somewhere to make sure it performs all right. Yes? It's typically, there are lots of other examples of this, but that's just one that's pretty common. And you need to package all that stuff up in a package and things like that. So I'll start by looking at how we can make these changes. So we need to make extensions to make that stuff work and need those extensions to be deployed to Umbraco Cloud. And the way we do that is via a package, right? So first we'll look at how will you actually get a package onto Umbraco Cloud to make that go. Of course, for us, it's a big thing. If we can't install Ucommerce on Umbraco Cloud, that's bad. So there are three things we need to make all this happen. So for us, we're a pretty big package these days, sort of similar in size to Umbraco itself. And of course, we need to work with this. There are three things we needed to do to make it work. We need to figure out the package installation because it is different from just installing on a standard Umbraco installation. There are some things to be aware of. We needed to figure out how we migrate our data that is structured data, right? The things we have that is similar to document types. And we needed to figure out how we can migrate data we have that is similar to content. These would be products, categories in our case. And for you, it might be something different. So first, the installation. This is the standard way of dealing with packages. You've probably all tried to install a package on Umbraco, right? So a standard Umbraco environment will have a local website and a SQL database. You'll install it, that's it, right? The challenge is when Umbraco Cloud looks like this, you can start to expect installations anywhere in the system, right? So you can install it on local, you can install it in development or our secondary environment live, right? The challenge is once I install it on one environment, it needs to go to this other environment, right? Because we have content flow, right? The content flow is basically you create some content here and it flows from left to right, right? So you create a node here and you sort of slowly push it towards live. Once it's ready, it goes live, right? That's content flow. And the same thing is true for packages and anything else you add to an environment. It sort of flows slowly towards the right. What that means for a package is that if you only get one install, you don't get all three, unfortunately. You have to sort of install one place. So for packages, every package in Umbraco has a challenge here. There we go. A package can basically be installed on any environment and then be pushed around. So there's only one installation happening still, but the package may find itself on your local environment. Imagine you're installing some package from the ecosystem on Umbraco Cloud, and then you pull your environment down on your development machine because you want to make some changes. Probably a fairly reasonable thing to do, and it will happen, right? So what that means for the package is it will be pulled down onto your local development environment, but there's no installation there. It just happens to be there somehow. And all of a sudden, the package may find itself in a situation where it needs some things that were originally created in the installation process, but it's not there because there were no installation process when the package moved over there, right? It was just files being copied from one location onto another, sort of, basically, right? Does that make sense? Good. So we need to deal with this situation of the package all of a sudden finding itself in a new environment, basically. Of course, the other thing is true as well, that it can be installed here and then pushed, via content flow up to the live environment, basically. So there is no installation here, there is no installation here, there is only the act of pushing the package from one environment to the other. So to sum it up, a traditional package, you basically have to install the packages on every environment, right? You've done this. You've probably set up web farms, multiple servers serving the same website to deal with performance scenarios and things like that. And you had to go and install the package on every server, yes? You also had to update it on every package. And the picture of nearly headless Nick will make sense in a little bit. So don't worry about it too much. But I think we can agree this is what needs to happen with packages today, right? It's pretty annoying that you have to install packages again and again. Make sure they're the same version. Make sure and update them all over the place. So today, we're coining for the very first time, 6 times in a row, a new concept around packages that I call headless packages. See, now it makes sense, right? So the headless package is one that can actually deal with the fact that it gets installed on any environment and then it happens to find itself on a different environment where it then needs to figure out that it actually needs to install itself. So for us, one of the big things is the database, right? As you can imagine, we have tons of tables that store payments and all sorts of things that you need to actually do e-commerce. And we need that database once we find ourselves on your development environment. So we need that to happen. Ton of other things as well. So the idea here is you can install a headless package on any environment, and you can then automatically set it up. It will magically set itself up on other environments it happens to find itself on. Does that make sense? It's very convenient. Think about a situation where you have elastic scaling in the cloud, right? One moment you have one server serving your website. The next moment you find yourself in the middle of Black Friday and you have 50 servers dealing with your website, right? And setting up 50 servers, if you do it manually, it takes a little bit of time. Black Friday may actually be over before you're done, right? So you ideally want that to happen automatically. That's just a side effect of that you start to see how those situations would actually be possible. So it's not something that we're talking about today, but it's sort of a side effect. Good. A word on package action. How many of you have tried building a package for Umbraco? Little one, big one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, good. How many of you have done a installation as part of that? So done some custom actions? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, you've done it, Monolith. Great. So forget about all the things you know about package action because they don't work anymore. They only run during the installation step, but as we now know, the package may find itself somewhere else where the installation doesn't run, and hence the package actions don't run. So forget about those. Doesn't work. Well, they still work, but they don't work for everything. So we need to come up with another approach. What we came up with was a way of detecting, as the .NET application starts up, whether we're initialized or not, whether everything is set up. So we just need a way to figure out whether we have all the things we need. So essentially, whenever the package, the Ucommerce package starts up, it asks itself, do I need to perform an actual installation or upgrade? That's what basically happens. Does that make sense? But it happens, headlessly, like our friend Nick. So one way of doing that in Umbraco is they have these application event handlers that basically, you can hook up on. They're like the standard ASP.NET stuff where you can hook up on when the application starts, la, 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 la. So you can do this in Umbraco. This is what it looks like in Umbraco 6.1. The challenge here is that Umbraco is not all, they revamp this stuff, they change it. Right? The challenge for a package like us is we need to work with every version of Umbraco. So we can't go with one model or the other model. Whenever they change something, we need basically to redo that piece. And it means that we would need to release a version of our package that would actually be specific to the individual CMSs, versions at least. That we'd like to avoid. So what we did is we came up with another approach that's straight .NET. So you can use this in any version of Umbraco. You can, and it'll just work. Basically, what we can do is, in .NET, there's something called the aptly named pre-application startup method. Did you get that? or shall I say it a little slower? Basically, it's something you register in assembly, and just by virtue of that assembly being present in your bin folder, .NET will look for these pre-application startup things, and it will execute the code you specify here, right? So this is basically this method here that's registered here. No registration required in web.config, no registration required with Umbraco. Just drop the DLL in, and you're in. Does that make sense? Good. So this is actually something you can use, for anything you need something like that. What we do is we then register a module, an HTTP module that deals with the actual installation. So this just goes in and says, we need to do an installation, so we register the module that actually does that. The reason we do that is because, you've probably seen this, the Umbraco APIs tend to be tied to the web context pretty heavily. Trying to use an Umbraco API outside of a web context is doable, but it's not fun. It hurts a little bit every time. So just to make sure that everything runs in a context that's the same as when you would actually install a package, we do the module, because that means Umbraco is all spun up with all its context ready to go. So it's just a way to mimic the environment that we would be in a normal installation. Yeah? Good. So what would the installation module do? You can probably imagine what it would look like, but it's basically just an event that actually automatically hooks up to the HTTP application. This is the ASP.NET website, basically, we're talking about. And the actual installation is just, your classic double lock pattern, because as you know, this runs on every request, right? That's the very first thing. So if you have me sort of accessing it, you are accessing it, somebody else is accessing it, you may have 100 people trying to access the website in one go. So if you don't use this double lock pattern, what will happen? Multiple installations and chaos ensues. Or so I've heard. I'm not saying we experienced this, but if we did, this was the solution we came up with. So just standard.NET. The beauty is it'll work in Umbraco 8, it'll work in Umbraco 6, it'll work in Umbraco 7, 4, even Umbraco 5 if you go down that route. Please don't. Good. Any questions for that? Excellent. I skipped over this fairly easily, and the reason is in Umbraco 8, they're introducing package migration, so a solution to this problem so you don't have to use this method I just outlined. But the challenge is it's only in Umbraco 8, so if you're using it, it will only work for Umbraco 8. So if you want to release a package that sort of can be widely used on different ones, you're back to straight.NET. So they are thinking about it, they are providing a solution for it, but it's only for Umbraco 8. Now the beauty is this model works with NuGet as well, because if you think about what happens when you drag down a NuGet package like Umbraco or Ucommerce, you suck it into Visual Studio, hit F5, and you expect everything to work, right? And that scenario is actually exactly the same as when you're moving from one Git repository to another. The package happens to find itself in a new environment where there's no database, none of the requirements to run. It looks whether it needs to initialize itself, and it does. And so for free, we get NuGet. Actually, we started with NuGet, so that was before Umbraco Cloud. So we got a little bit for free in Umbraco Cloud, but that's sort of the way it works. Does that make sense? So if you're doing a NuGet package as well, this might also be a good way to go. If you think about what Umbraco does, right? When Umbraco needs to initialize itself, it pops up that nice web page and runs the installer. That's how it does it, ish. Okay? Good. Quick note on web config. This was something that surprised us a little bit. Advanced packages may need things in web config, like HTTP modules that we just looked at, or other things, right? It's fairly common stuff. It's okay to change the web config, but not all the time. This is just to keep you on your toes at all times, so you don't get too comfortable. So in the local environment, the environment that you clone down on your machine, it's okay to change web config. If you do it there, push it onto the development environment, live environment, it'll just be a file that will be pushed. The reason being that the web config goes to Git, it goes to another Git, and what actually happens is there is another file system that Git pushes the file onto. So web config will be here, and it will be here. And as long as your web config flows like this, it's okay, because it just basically, you should imagine this file system as being overridden whenever Umbraco Cloud updates. It takes the Git repository, pushes that to the live website, and that's how it works. Does that make sense? Good. The challenge, though, is imagine this scenario, right? And this is where they keep you on your toes. What if the package is actually installed on the development environment? All of a sudden, the flow we just looked at is reversed, right? Instead of the Git repository coming first, we're actually modifying the file system and pushing that back to Git, right? Now, for all these environments, you may have different web config files, right? It's pretty common. You'd probably do the transformations and all that. So for debug environments, you have debug set to true. For release environments, release mode, right? Just to make sure performance and all that good stuff. So the challenge here is if we modify web config here, we would expect it to be pushed back to Git, but that doesn't really make sense because the web config might be different for the different runtime environments, different connection strings for databases, all that good stuff, right? So they can't really take web config and push it back. But of course, the package just modified web config, but it's not pushed back, right? So imagine when an update comes here and gets pushed there. Can you see what might be the problem? Then the web config is actually returned to the version prior to the installation. And all of a sudden, we have an awesome problem to deal with when we're doing packages, right? It's logical, but very surprising when you see it the first time, I can tell you that. So when you're doing the installation, it's not okay to install to change web.config. So now essentially we have two scenarios we need to deal with. And they thought about that. They actually introduced these transformations that you can include with your package, and they're actually executed when things move here. But there's a little twist to that, because if you install here, it's not executed. Right? So now we're in an awesome situation where we actually need to do the standard installation without these transformations because they don't happen automatically. And when it's pushed down there, Umbraco will actually execute these. So we have to support two different ways of installing it to make it work seamlessly for you. Right? So if you do packages, this is just something to keep in mind to make sure that you create a nice user experience. It's a little. I was a little frustrated when I learned this, to be sure. But the beauty is, once all that is done, you have a seamless installation. You can install anywhere, you can push anywhere, and everything is good. From your perspective, it just works, even though some funky things are happening under the covers. Does that make sense? And this is the experience I believe packages need to have on Umbraco. But it does require some doing. Any questions for that? Is it crystal clear? Great. Okay. Oh, NuGet as well. That was for free. Just to reiterate. So now to the data. This is where it becomes, this is why we're doing it, right? So we can actually get some custom data in there to work with. Blog comments, products, catalogs, whatever is specific to your domain, right? So for us, content data are products, right? So the way we did Ucommerce is we said, well, we need to support hundreds of thousands of products in our catalogs. And we can't stick them in content because that makes Umbraco incredibly slow. So we need somewhere else to put them. So we have some tables that we stick that into. It's not rocket science at all, but it's just so you get the way that we are thinking about it. So products, they are content data. They're like content, but there's something different in a custom data structure. Yes? Structure data is, so because we had to stick our data into a separate system, we also had to come up with a way to describe that data a document types, but we need some different things, right? We need to be able to talk about variants and pricings and things like that. That Umbraco doesn't support out of the box. So we came up with something we call definitions. You can think of them roughly as document types for commerce. That's sort of the way to think about it. So we need to be able to move one of these suckers here from one environment to another, structure data, right? So we have the two prototypes of data that we actually want to move. Here's a little, how many of you actually noticed the UUID feature on Umbraco 8? 1, 2? So UUIDs are really just another way of saying GUIDs with some stuff on it. So a little more stuff, but that's it. So when you're doing this stuff, data is flowing freely. Well, not freely. You are sort of actively, making decisions on when to do it. But data is essentially moving freely between your systems. And that means GUIDs are super duper important, right? But because what happens if you have a media item with the ID of 10 on this server, and you have a media item with 10 on this server, it may not actually be the same media item, right? Odds are it's probably not, unless you've done some stuff to make that happen. So GUIDs are super duper important. So if you are dealing with custom data, GUID all the things, yes? So let's look at structured data. So here's the scenario. My user comes in on the development environment, edits and saves a definition. He creates a new definition. Say all these products here, they have some shared traits. So I want to introduce a new definition that actually adds those shared traits and then inherits that to the other ones, right? So that might be SEO information, something like that. So our user goes in, edits, saves that on one environment, and we need to push that information from this environment to that environment without automatically, right? So, so here's what's actually happening. So normally, in a standard scenario without Umbraco Cloud, I would edit and save into my web application and it would go to SQL Server, right? That's where document types lives and definitions as well. With Umbraco Cloud, it actually also takes a side turn there at some point and goes into the file system and into Git. Yes? So now we have a file. To make that happen, we need that item provider from before, right? To take the custom data, turn it into an item on the file system, and then stick it onto another server where we can rehydrate it, if you will. So the process it's fairly simple once you know what. Somewhere in your code, you need to pick up the fact that this is happening and that you need to actually serialize some stuff onto the file system and move it. So basically what's happening is they have something called the basic event manager, which is basically queuing your data to be published or deployed. Deployed is the proper word here. So it doesn't actually do it, it just gives Umbraco a signal that there is something to be done. So it has an opportunity to queue up things and deal with multiple objects in one go for performance. It doesn't actually do that yet, so it can be a little slow, but that's it. Handle pack basically takes the data object we want to move and turns it into an item. That's it, and then it's serialized, stuck onto the file system. Simple stuff, yes? So what we end up with here, in my awesome... So I did this presentation before it was renamed to Umbraco Cloud, so for some reason I came up with this awesome name, US Clean, which it doesn't really play well if you think about it, but what happens here is the file system here, you can see how Umbraco already puts in its own stuff, right? So data types you create, document types, macros, templates, they all go to the file system. This is somewhere else than where they usually reside. And we have our stuff here that goes into a different folder. Remember prefixes here, people. I'm just saying, don't call your things data types and document types. You may be overriding things that Umbraco is creating. And I'm not saying this is something we've seen with Umbraco before. How many of you have tried to do a right-click menu in Umbraco, sort of old-school style, where the ID is a letter? No? Okay, so maybe you can ask me about this story, but they use letters as ID, actual letters in the alphabet for IDs. And every package could basically have right-click menus. So if I use the letter A in my package and somebody else also used the letter A in their package, guess who won? Last man. But there was only one in there. And they're sort of doing it again here because they have the name, right? And we use the same name, we start overriding their stuff. So use a prefix for your package like we do. It's a great little tip there. Inside the folders, you end up with an item. So this is a GUID that identifies the actual item that we need to move. That can be put onto Git, and we're good to go. Yeah. So now we push it. Whoops. Now we look at it, so you can see what a beautiful XML file we've created. Don't worry about it. It just turns into XML on the file system. That's it. Right. So some of it is standard Umbraco. So you can see it has some dependencies here that tells us whether there are any media or stuff like that connects to this stuff. And the actual payload is down here, this there. Those are actual definition, actual custom data. All the rest of it is just from Umbraco, so it knows how to do the bookkeeping. Good. So we need to set up the item provider. It's just a class. As you can see, it inherits this class, item provider. It sets itself up in the constructor. And this is where the most important thing is that area where you would extract it to, right? And the ID, these IDs are super important. When you queue items, you will always need to tell it what provider to use. So it's always a provider ID and an item ID that go together to send something to deployment and also to bring it back. Any questions for that? This is just the first step of setting it up. Next step is actually packing the thing, right? Oh, wait, actually you need to find a place to execute this stuff, right? So in your package somewhere you have a UI where a user is editing that stuff. For us, it's the definition editor. For you, it will be something different. It will be when a blog post is posted, or it will be when a media item is requested for cropping, or I don't know, some workflow stuff, I don't know. So for us, we have something that I love to talk about, our pipelines. So whenever we save something, we execute it, what we call a pipeline. It's basically like an event, but where you know when each of the event handlers actually execute. So each of these are things that happen when it's executed. And so we just added to our to the relevant pipelines we have, add to cache, the Umbraco Cloud cache, and it will then be automatically published after the fact. Does that make sense? So this is specific to the way we do it. You will have other ways of doing it. It's just a way, right? So you can see. And basically what it does is in add to cache, this is the actual code that's running. We find this is the Umbraco Cloud thing. We send to cache the item identifier, the entity name, and that's it. And the item identifier will hold two things, right? The actual entity ID and the actual item provider ID that identifies the thing that can serialize and deserialize. Yeah? And then it's packed like that. So we're called. So the first thing is to queue it. The next thing is Umbraco will call out and say, I'm ready to transfer data from one environment to another. And this is what happens, right? So we're notified what the thing is. For us, we need to query our data layer to actually find the thing. We create another class to represent the item we want to serialize, and then we just map the information back and forth, right? So we take the property A from here, stick it over there. Property B from there, stick it over there. Simple stuff. But the cool thing is down here at the bottom, I'm not sure if you can see it, we also start to add dependencies. So this is where we can go in and say, well, this thing actually needs this other thing to work. So content node and media, for example. Or actually even better, content node and document type, right? It doesn't make sense to publish a piece of content without its document type because you can't know if the document type is actually already there on the target system. So you need both of them. Yes, this is the same thing. When a definition for us is a data type, is like a documentation. Document type, that's the word I'm looking for. And a document type, of course, has some data types associated with it because the fields will be ints or media or blah, 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 blah. So we need that as well because it may be a new thing. With that done, .NET will take over and serialize and stick it on the file system. That's it. But the process is literally just three methods. Set up the factory, the thing that can deal with the serialization. Tell Umbraco that there's something we want serialized, and then handle serialization. That's it. Simple stuff. Yes? Any questions? Boop. This is Umbraco Cloud. Isn't it beautiful? It changes a little bit, but it sort of roughly looks like this. You can see here we have one environment here, development and live. And so when this process I just showed you happens in your code, what happens is we're actually creating a change set in Git. Right? At the end of the day, that's what happens as well. So Umbraco as a cloud, as a service, as Umbraco Cloud, there we go, knows that there are now change sets that can be pushed from one environment to another. So it's just using that standard Git way of pushing from one environment to the other at this point. This is where it becomes beautiful and very elegant to me because Umbraco doesn't need to deal with transport and things like that. That's all Git. So you can see how this would actually be a technique that's applicable to a bunch of other types of systems, right? Whenever there's a publishing or deployment process, Git is actually a pretty good thing. You can even use Git to merge things, right, if you wanted to. But that's a different story. So when I click this button here, click, it's moved to live, where we need to take the file that is then transferred from one environment to the other and bring it back into the CMS. Yeah? So let's do that. So development, we push. And then we need to deal with, we get the file, the item provider, the thing we're building, actually handles the deserialization, we get a DTO, and then this is where all the magic happens. Yes. Because this is where we need to figure out, this is where it actually becomes a little difficult, because when you have a data object in hand, you now need to interrogate your data access layer and figure out, do I have that data object in hand already? Did it go away? What needs to change? So you need to basically do a merge of the two objects if it exists already. If it's brand new, you know what to do. Just plop it in the database. Yep. So first, handle deserialization. This is what it looks like. It's the only thing that's required here is basically that we give it the class that's required to take this byte array here and turn that into an actual object so we can start working with it. So literally all this is that we give it the class. That's the heavy lifting, if you will, of this. Not so heavy. It's doable, right? With that, we then need to handle the magic piece here, and I'm not going to show you all the magic because that's your code, right? But this is what happens when we then need to turn the item into the actual piece of data we want on the other end. So for Umbraco, the item might represent a document type or a content node. For us, it might represent a product or a definition. It's the same process regardless. But it's still an item. It's not the actual thing that Umbraco can store. So it needs to convert it into something it knows about. And that's what happens here. For us, it's the definition, right? That's the thing we serialized before and converted to. So the first thing is to figure out whether we actually have an item already of that type. So the item GUID, right? The item and the GUID, we need to figure out, do we have something that already represents the element that's being moved? And if we don't, we'll create a new one, basically. And then here, this is the merge. This is where the magic happens. But you can imagine the code, right? We're now standing with two objects in hand, and we need to figure out what the difference is. This can be pretty friggin' complicated, right? Lars Erik, whom some of you may know, one of the MVPs from last year at Code Garden, suggested actually using Git for the merge. But the problem is you'll still have to create an actual item here at the end of the day. So you're still faced with that same problem. And now imagine you have a graph of objects that you need to it can become pretty complicated. Then you save. Luckily, I just fixed it with a big yellow star, and it's done. And then I saved the thing, and that's it. So we've taken, with this process, data from one place, stuck it on a file system, moved the via Git onto another server, used taking that data and turning it back into data, right? Taking that file and turning it back into data. Boom, this one was moved, and that's it. Now, how do you deal with dependencies between things? Some dependencies are known at runtime, right? So a document type will have some property editors on it, right? Those are known, you know to look for them. But on your content, it may not be known, right? If you have a list of other content nodes, who knows? And it may be other things as well. That's where the resolvers come in, so we can actually start to interrogate the data that's being serialized and then start the process all over again for the dependencies. Does that make sense? Good. So for us, this is just a quick example. So this is actually where the dependency is not exclusively in the custom data. It's actually between Umbraco and your package, in this case, Ucommerce, right? So we have a page in Umbraco. It has one of our pickers on it that actually picks products. So it picks data from a data source that Umbraco doesn't know about. And we need to make sure that as this page is moved over, these three products actually jump along, right? Otherwise, it will break. It's the same as putting a picture on a thing. So think about that. It's pretty cool, actually. You have standard Umbraco. You have something Umbraco doesn't know about at all. And now we can actually start to make sure that this whole notion of content flow works across the entire thing. This is beautiful, I'm just saying. So let's see how we can make that go. So, I don't know, it's called a property data resolver provider. It's probably some of the stuff that will change, but the concept will probably remain the same for Deployer 1.0. So first, a little visitor pattern that says, can I actually deal with this thing? So you get an item and you know the item event, and typically you just need to say, well, it's when I'm extracting or packaging, that's when I need to go. So just use that as is, don't worry about it. Then the trick is down here. We basically look at all of the pieces of data that are on the thing that's being packaged right now and say, well, does this include something I need? Does this include something I need? Does this include something I need? For us, we know the alias of the picker, so we can actually fairly quickly go in and say, well, if it's a Ucommerce picker, it will pick something we know about. And so we can qualify this particular field to actually go to packaging and create dependencies on it. Right? So just look for what you need. Does that make sense? It just activates or not when it's packaging. The second part of this is once it's determined whether it should execute, it then executes, right? Classic visitor pattern. So we get the item in again, so the node in this case, and then we can look at all the properties on the node and say, well, where are the ones with that picker on it? And then go into the value of that thing and find all the product IDs that were stored. Of course, this would be GUIDs, but it's IDs in this case. So we split it, blah, 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 and we turn it into dependencies. This is what you saw before. But these are ad hoc dependencies that are created depending on what the content editors have actually done inside of the CMS. And it's not just taking things that Umbraco already knows about, it's actually taking things that Umbraco didn't know about. And once it's done, the process starts all over again because Umbraco will then know, well, here are some dependencies that I need to kick off the process for again, so I can go back to the beginning of the slide deck and show you it all over again for dependencies. But you would probably be bored out of your skulls at that point. So just imagine me doing that. Yeah? Any questions? Does that make sense? Excellent. Not sure why that's in there. Oh yeah, that's the process that we're not going to look at. Okay, good. That's it. That's literally all you need to do. To my mind, Umbraco Cloud is super cool because it solves one of the fundamental, most annoying, time-consuming problems of moving data from one place to another. That in of itself is cool. To my mind, what's even cooler as a package developer is the fact that Umbraco has thought about not just doing it for themselves, but actually opening it up so others can play as well. This is an area where Umbraco has become better and better over the years, and I think this is a great example of where they've arrived now, that the whole ecosystem can actually play and support Umbraco Cloud. So you can get a smooth experience, not just with Umbraco, but also packages like Ucommerce and other packages that support all this content flow. So really, really cool stuff. It really shows Umbraco maturing and growing up, to my mind. Any questions before we stop for today? Everything is clear. That's great. Cool. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks to Byte5 for putting it on the show. It's always a pleasure to come here and speak to all of you. Thank you.